Let's go Mets. Let's go Mets. Let's go Mets. Yeah.
You gotta believe and invest with your heart. Orange and blue till Mets do us part. Spring training, oh yes, it's the start. City Field gritty till Mets do us part. Hit home runs and knock it out the park. Big Apple till Mets do us part. You gotta believe and invest with your heart. Listen to the show till Mets do us part. John from Brooklyn, Gibby reps NJ. With the other team, I don't care what your friends say. Mets fans, we focus like a sensei. Listen to the podcast Monday, Wednesday. Made a couple bad plays, but we still won. Character, yup, we're gonna build some. Are you gonna check the pod? Is real fun. Just like Mookie, I will, son. So invest with your heart. Orange and blue till Mets do us part. Spring training, oh yes, it's the start. City Field gritty till Mets do us part. Hit home runs and knock it out the park. Big Apple till Mets do us part. You gotta believe and invest with your heart. Listen to the show.
Available now on all streaming platforms. If you love the New York Mets, check out Till Mets Do Us Part. Enough rapping. Let's get to yapping.
Yo, what's going on? Welcome into another episode, a very special episode of Till Mets Do Us Part, where we are live on YouTube, live on Twitter, like we are usually every single week, Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Of course, coming to you guys live a little bit earlier this week, talking about the news that you all know that everybody has spent the last, 18 hours or so celebrating, sleeping good, maybe not sleeping at all, and that is Juan Soto signing with our New York Mets, a record-breaking deal, not only in Major League Baseball, but across all of professional sports. $765 million guaranteed over the course of 15 years. And along the way, he decides to leave the New York Yankees for our New York Mets. So, of course, we had to do a show. We had to talk about it. Unfortunately, my co-host, Matt Ibanez, could not be here with us today. He will be back on the show tomorrow as we go live pretty much all week, covering all the things that are going on with the winter meetings. But I am John Sapanaro, coming to you guys from Burbank, California. We have a very special guest, somebody who I just had the privilege of hanging out with. It seems once a year we get to hang out and talk Mets at the Queens Baseball Convention, which was this past Saturday. But most importantly, she was one of the first people on the air right after the news of Juan Soto to the Mets broke. So I figured if she could do it, let's get her on the show. Let's talk about it. The one and only Lori Rubinson from WFAN. Lori, how are you doing today? Ear-to-ear smiles I see from you and all Mets fans right now.
John, you know what? I'm amazing. That's how I'm doing. I like probably like everybody else, I feel like the world changed. The baseball world changed on this weekend, and just remarkable. But on Sunday, it will be a day I think that Mets fans, will remember. Like, where were you? What were you doing when you heard the news? And I said this on the radio last night, but I was flying so high. I walk into WFAN. I walk into the building, late at night where I'm going in to do my radio show. And there's the guy who sits down there at the front desk, by himself. And when I walk in and I put my key card in, I get into the building, I look at the guy and I go, "Are you a baseball fan?" And he says, "Yeah." I go, "Juan Soto to the Mets." Really? Yeah. And then I just kept going into work. Like, it was just one of these things where, like, I wanted to hug a stranger. Like, Juan Soto to the Mets. Like, the world changed. That's how it feels.
It did. I mean, look, it's baseball landscape altering, especially here in New York. I know a lot of times, we get New York centric. And I say here in New York, I don't live in New York anymore. I'm out in LA, where the Dodgers have been the darlings of baseball, or, the most hated team in baseball, depending on your perspective over the last several years. But I don't think it's exaggerating, Lori, to say that this fundamentally shifts the fabric of not only Major League Baseball in New York, but Major League Baseball as a whole, because the Mets have finally sort of arrived in a way where, look, things changed a little bit when Steve Cohen bought the team from the Wilpons. Things changed a little bit when they went out and they acquired Francisco Lindor, and then they give him a record contract at the time. Of course, that matters. I'm not minimizing that. It also mattered when they went out and they got Max Scherzer and they got Justin Verlander, even though that season, the Verlander season, didn't go the way that they wanted. All of this stuff matters along the way. I'm not trying to minimize any of it. And I'd also be remiss without mentioning the acquisition of David Stearns to be the president of baseball ops. All of those things have been chipping away. But there's been a criticism of the Steve Cohen era of, well, you know, the Mets haven't gotten everybody they've tried to get. The Mets have been used to other teams to jack up prices and, you know, on guys. And Yamamoto decided not to come here. And, you know, the Mets, depending on what story you believe, decided to play nice guys with Aaron Judge and the Yankees and not get involved in that bidding out of deference to Hal and all this stuff. So now I think all of this stuff has changed completely. When you go out and you sign a player like Juan Soto in his prime to the kind of deal that you sign him to, and your biggest competitors are the vaunted Yankees, a team that he was already on, that everybody has admitted, you know, he loved his time there. He would have liked to come back if things aligned. Well, he doesn't go back. He chooses the Mets. So it doesn't feel like an exaggeration for me to say this has changed fundamentally how the Mets need to be perceived in New York and nationally.
So two things there. One, yes, it changes everything. It really does. And we'll talk about that. But I have a pet peeve that with Mets fans that I think also Steve Cohen buying the Mets was game-changing, life-changing for Mets fans, so massive. And the criticisms, which, and I try not to tell fans how to root, how to feel, you fan the way you want to, all that sort of stuff. But I know over the past year, even as recently as, you know, look, Pablo Lopez throws a mitt into the stands, and the nadir and negativity this past spring, where there were Mets fans who were comparing this to the Wilpon era and complaining. And I was thinking, if you can't see how this is different, how there is a plan, how smart this is, if you can't appreciate that you have, Mets fans, the richest owner in all of baseball, footing right now the largest payroll, even if it's not every single thing you want in this moment. If you can't see that, well, then, you know what? Get a new pair of glasses, because there's something wrong with your vision. This is fundamentally different. And yes, did Steve Cohen, who has had so much success in business, expect that maybe coming into Major League Baseball, it would come a little quicker and easier? That the other owners wouldn't resist letting him interview the candidates he wanted for front office positions? Yeah, he expected that it would go a little differently, be a little quicker. But take a step back and look at the plan right now. Part of why I believe Juan Soto is a Met right now, yes, you can say it's the money, more money. There was a little bit more money, but I think he looked at these two owners and he said, and ask yourself this question: which owner, and frankly, president of baseball operations and manager, but which owner in particular would you feel more confident in right now and into the future for the next 10, 15 years? Steve Cohen or Hal Steinbrenner? If you sign this contract with Juan Soto and you're going to get $50 million a year, 51 from the Mets, 47.5 from the Yankees, whatever it is, almost $50 million, you know, or over, you know, if you're going to spend that money for one owner, he's going to spend it in Steve Cohen, and he's going to keep investing, and it won't even impact how he spends and invests on this team. For the other one, he told you in May that this level of spending, Hal said that this level of spending wasn't sustainable. So which guy do you trust more? I think this came down to, sure, it comes down to money, but this came down to which owner was Juan Soto more confident and comfortable with moving forward? And I think the answer to that is Steve Cohen, the new king of New York sports.
Yeah, I think that's a great assertion. I agree. I try, sometimes I'm bad at it, telling people how to fan and how not to fan, but I always used to say with the Wilpons, and not just the Wilpons, but just everybody that they then installed, whether it was the manager, the GM, whomever it was, the Mets, when they succeeded a lot in spite of the ownership, in spite of the direction or lack thereof of the team. So I agree with you 100% that even though this has not been a straight line, and hell, when is success ever a straight line? For Steve Cohen, from the moment he buys the team to this point, yeah, it has not been easy, maybe not as easy as some of us would have hoped, maybe not as easy as Steve Cohen would have hoped, but everything changed that day. And I think more so this instance with signing Juan Soto becomes the fruition of everything changing.
Yes.
And so I want to just dive into the numbers for people who aren't maybe up on it at this point. Maybe people aren't as active on Twitter really quick. So it's 15 years, $765 million guaranteed. There's a $75 million signing bonus. It's a full no trade clause. There's an opt-out for the player after 5 years, but an opt-out that essentially the Mets control, because if they decide to just tack on $4 million in AAV over the course of those final 10 years, it voids the opt-out. That would bring the total of the contract to $805 million. And I think this is another big one, Lori. No deferrals. This is today's money. This is all the money up front. And when you're Steve Cohen and you're talking about being able to flex the massive wealth that you have personally, I know sometimes players like deferrals. They like to get paid till they're 60 years old. But you know what? Money does not gain value over time. It's only going to lose value. So the fact that he gets all of this money over the life of the contract, I think is a big deal. And I think it's really Steve Cohen stepping up and doing whatever it takes, which is what we heard from a lot of sources, that he would do whatever it takes to get the player. He did it all to get the player.
Yes. The no deferrals is huge. The 5-year opt-out that you can negate by paying him $4 million more per year, that part seems absurd to me. Because, I mean, you know what? Juan Soto, have at it. If you want to opt out after 5 years and give the Mets the next 5 years of your absolute central prime, and you want to run the risk that you're going to opt out, if I'm David Stearns, I'm going to whisper in Steve Cohen's ear and say, fantastic, let him opt out. And you know what? We'll sign another contract that's going to be less than this, because there's not going to be, I don't think, as much competition for this contract from other owners for 5 years from now, a player in his 30s. It's just a different world.
Right.
So I think there is so little chance of him opting out of a contract that is going to pay him 51. You know, maybe the economics of baseball will have changed by then, and maybe this will seem like a bargain. I highly doubt it, because I also think with what's going on, it's a separate discussion, but with all the media rights issues and the local media deals that a lot of the teams, especially smaller markets, and some of them are struggling with, that the big market teams have a big benefit of having their local market media. You know, they own their stations and all this stuff. There's a whole thing brewing here. So he's not opting out, in my opinion. That whole thing is absurd, but sure, offer him an opt out, put in candy, put in all this stuff. Who the hell cares? The no deferrals is insane. That's where, for people who, you were alluding to it, John, but from an economic standpoint, this is the 5 minutes that I was paying attention when I went to Wharton and got an MBA. But there's something called the time value of money, and money today is worth more than money down the road. If I don't have it down the road, I'm not earning interest on it today. Money today is worth more than money 10 years from now. And so with that, for people, a lot of people probably know this, but Shohei Ohtani's $700 million contract, people give that a today current value of about, what is it, like $460 million?
Yeah,
roughly. So that is today's value. It sounds like 700, but it's really like Ohtani signs like a $460 million contract. He did the Dodgers the biggest favor in the world on the economics of that contract. Well, Juan Soto and Scott Boras aren't doing anybody favors. This one is today's value money. With today's value money, that contract is valued, no deferrals. That sucker is valued at over $700 million, $765 million. So there's a massive, it is crazy. And for people who want to complain and say Juan Soto is just a hitter and Shohei Ohtani is a two-way player and all of this sort of stuff, you can say it, and it is true. But this is also the beauty of Steve Cohen. Is here was a 26-year-old first ballot Hall of Famer. We throw around the term generational, whatever a lot, but like generational hitter who is on a trajectory and track for the all-time great hitters of the game. And he's just maybe now getting into his prime, and that Steve Cohen can pay for that. And still then the Mets can turn around David Stearns and say, look, do we want Pete Alonso? Let's get Pete Alonso. Do we want to, do we need other things to fill out our team? Let's pay for that. This won't hamper or change how the Mets spend money. That's the incredible part, waking up this morning to a new reality as a Mets fan, that anything and everything is possible.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's exactly why why Mets fans feel as bright and as sunshiny as they do today, because anything is still possible beyond this massive deal with Juan Soto. If you guys are watching live right now, this is Till Mets Do Us Part. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitter, like we are each and every single week, usually Wednesdays at 5:30 Eastern time. But special episode because special circumstances. One half of the team this week, John Saponaro, joined by the one and only Lori Rubinson of WFAN. If you have not already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. When we started the show, we're 17 subscribers on YouTube away from 1,000. When we hit 1,000, we are giving away an autographed Edwin Diaz baseball. Who doesn't want that? And Lori, I said last week, I was like, you know what? It's the holiday time. We would love to give it away to one awesome subscriber, but doesn't mean that you have to keep it. You could give it away for the holidays if you wanted to, as you're showing off one of your autographed baseballs.
Absolutely. I was saying to you before, my brother gave me, it's a 1986 Mets signed baseball. And you can look, you can see, how Ray Knight, you and I were just together at Queens Baseball Convention. I, had the good fortune of interviewing Jose Reyes, which was really fun. Ray Knight was there. I'm looking at it right now. There's the Ray Knight signature on the baseball. So, you're giving that away. That's just awesome. So I'm sure people subscribe. Why not? Why wouldn't you? And somebody's going to win an Edwin Diaz signed baseball. Very cool.
Exactly. Well, thank you for that. I'll jump into the comments really quick. Probably won't have time for too many comments, although it's a big part of our show just because of the nature of this particular show. But a lot of good ones. This one I really love from Mr. Nobody. Says Cohen uses cash only, no LA credit cards. And I think that's something to be said with regards to the way Cohen not necessarily does operate, but can operate. He is one person who has all the money in his own bank account for all intents and purposes, and can sign whatever check he wants. And we know that the Dodgers have a ton of money ever since they were sold away from Frank McCourt, who was cash poor to own a baseball team. But they are a group. There is a decision-making board there that they have to go through. Now, look, it hasn't slowed them down. It hasn't hampered them. They are truly a model franchise in terms of building a team in modern Major League Baseball. But look, Lori, there is something to be said about Steve Cohen just being able to say, how much? Okay, and just sign the check. I actually think that that's why after the initial sale to Cohen fell through all those years ago, it circled back and it just wound up back with Cohen. It didn't matter, how much money A-Rod and J-Lo could generate because they still had to generate money. And Cohen could just sit there and say, what is it, $2.5 billion? I'll write the check right now. Here you go. And I think that we finally saw, him being able to do everything that we all hoped he would do, was capable of doing, kind of alluded to him being able to do. And you said that, it's not just money. It's there's more to it than the money situation here with regards to team building. But I do want to point out that the Yankees deal reportedly topped out at $760 over 16 years with about a $60 million signing bonus. Now, if you stretch that money over the same 15-year period that the Mets signed him for, it's more like $712 million, if you look at the actual value of the deal. So the Mets' top end value of the deal at 805 is nearly $100 million more, which is a lot.
That's where I'm going to call BS.
Okay.
Because the top end one includes him opting out and them throwing in the kicker. And people are using that. And I just think that top end, him opting out and the Mets saying, oh no, please don't opt out. We'll throw more money on top of it to have you not opt out. It sounds nice. That part feels like cosmetic window dressing to me.
Okay.
That part of it. What is real, $75 million signing bonus versus $60 million that the Yankees were offering. It's $15 million more. What is real, average annual value of these two contracts, Mets deal, $51 million a year, Yankees, $47.5 million a year. So the Mets deal is more money. There's no doubt about it. But here's what's, I think, incredible if you're a Mets fan. I'm going to be honest with you. I had conversations at the Queens Baseball Convention with some Mets fans, on Saturday. And up through Saturday, I was pretty confident that the Mets and Steve Cohen would actually sign Juan Soto, because I just thought that what ended up happening would happen, which is no matter what anybody else would offer, Steve Cohen would say, I'll offer $50 million more. Like, he just would offer more than everybody else, and he would eventually get his man. I thought that's what would happen. And then come Sunday morning, the rumors start flying out there that this thing has gotten over $700 million, and the Yankees are now at like $710. They're over $700 million. And that's when I thought to myself, wow, he played in pinstripes. The bleacher creature serenaded him. He had the full experience, old timers day, Derek Jeter, retiring Yankee, going to Cooperstown that way, Monument Park, like everything Aaron Judge, they went to the World Series, everything you could possibly want. And now the dollars have gotten over $700 million, which is all the money he ever wanted and hoped this contract would get. No deferrals, all of that. The Yankees gave everything. I thought, you know what? That's it. He's going back to the Yankees. The Mets, what's an extra, few million dollars? It won't matter. And that's where, when you look at it and say to yourself, we can say, yes, people who want to say it's all about the money. He was a mercenary. He was always going to take top dollar. And they want to tell themselves that if the dollars were the exact same, or the Toronto Blue Jays had offered $1 million more than the New York Mets, he would somehow be a Blue Jay today. You can tell yourself that all you want. But what I believe is this: the dollars, yes, it's more money. $51 million a year is more than $47.5 million a year. The Mets offered more. But I think that this decision also came down to the owner, and which owner was Juan Soto more comfortable, could spend this contract money and keep spending, versus the one who was going to tighten his belt and say, I'm spending this money. This is going to impact what I do in the future. And I think he just had more confidence in Steve Cohen. And the other part of it is, we talked about this a moment ago. I wouldn't minimize it. Steve Cohen with the money, and Steve and Alex Cohen creating a family atmosphere that players like Francisco Lindor love. David Stearns as the brains and the strategy and a track record, not just with the Milwaukee Brewers, but last year with the Mets, showing what he could do. And then you have Carlos Mendoza and the reputation, and what, even in 1 year, the positivity, the way he handles players, and the way that was perceived. You have all those things on the Mets side, and you compare those three and say to yourself, Hal Steinbrenner versus Steve Cohen, Brian Cashman, who, as good as he's been, would it shock you if within a couple of years Brian Cashman gets pushed aside to a different role within the Yankees and they have a new GM? And Aaron Boone, every year, the question is, is Boone back? Is he not? The Mets, as crazy as it seems, are more stable and have deeper pockets than the Yankees. I think that's what Juan Soto ultimately bought.
I could not agree with you more. And I'm so happy. It was on the tip of my tongue. I'm so happy that you used the word stable, because I think it seems
it's crazy to say that about the Mets, right?
Yes,
Stable.
it feels like blasphemy. I mean, look, you're a Mets fan, but you're on the radio in New York City every week. You're not just talking about the Mets, you're talking about the Yankees. You've got to be fair and balanced. I think you're one of the most fair personalities on New York sports radio right now. And so, I don't think this is you and I as two Mets fans, waxing poetic about how great this scenario is. I think it's very fair, although it seems crazy over the last 30 years to say that the Mets are the more stable team, but you nailed it. I mean, look, I know Mendoza's here just the 1 year, but if anything, that is in his favor, not to his detriment, because he was here for 1 year. They made it to the World Series, to the NLCS. And they rebounded in a huge way after getting off to a terrible start. You've got David Stearns. He's one of, if not the brightest people in his role in the entire sport. You've got Cohen. You've got everything we've already talked about with the money. You've got Alex Cohen and what they're building in terms of this family atmosphere. I have argued, and you and I talked about this on Saturday in the green room in terms of hypotheticals, that if the Yankees didn't already have Juan Soto on their team, that they would not even be in on Juan Soto, and that they shouldn't be in on Juan Soto because it would hamper their ability to build as good of a team as possible, because they're going to sign Soto if they did. And then I can't see them going and signing another big ticket free agent, another all-star caliber player that they quite frankly need. If you look around their team, they've got a lot of money invested in some really good players. They've got a lot of almost dead money invested in some not great players to this point. And I think the Mets have just better positioned to offer Juan Soto the kind of security and, to use your word again, stability that he's going to be looking for to hopefully finish out the rest of his career. And I don't think that's an overstatement at this point. I think it's very true. However crazy, look, I didn't really see the Mets win in '86. I was born like 6 days before the World Series ended. But my entire life, the Mets have never been better at the than the Yankees at anything. And now I think we can kind of look at it and see where the Mets have the clear-cut advantages. If you're being fair, I'm not saying this with orange and blue glasses on, but I think a lot of what I've heard from Yankee fans on Twitter and on the radio is them, with their pinstripe glasses on, kind of arguing to the contrary. Oh, they're still little brother. It's still LOL Mets. I think a lot of that is dead. I think LOL Mets is dead forever.
You know what? So two things. One is on 1986 is for those people who are, watching, listening to us. If you were around in 1986, and look, I'll tell you, even before my time, for anybody who understands their New York baseball history, you have relatives who tell you about what it was like when the Dodgers, the Giants, and the Yankees, 3 baseball teams in our city. And that's obviously before my time. But apparently with the 2 National League teams here, the Yankees were the number 1 team. But there were 2 really popular National League teams, which made this feel like a National League city. Because you had 2 really fun teams, and then you had the Yankees.
Right.
Yankees were always number 1, but 2 really other interesting teams. Then they both move out to California. Yankees and Yankees. The Mets start off, and obviously bumbling and stumbling. But fast forward to the 1980s, and I can tell you from personal experience living here, is that the Keith Hernandez, Doc, and Darryl era of Mets baseball, which we thought would yield more titles than just one, but the Mets were the fun team, the cool team, the it team. It was a New York Mets town for a period of time. And then it, like always happens with Mets baseball, eras fizzle, things go bad, things go south, something happens, and we find ourselves again, with the Mets being somewhat downtrodden and whatever, and it's another down era and losing and all that sort of stuff, and a lot of LOL Mets. What feels different this time is Steve Cohen came in and systematically, he waited for David Stearns. He didn't hire another president. This was the guy he wanted. And even if it was going to take a few years, he was patient and he waited for that president of baseball operations he wanted, David Stearns, and hiccups along the way, but he got his guy, number one guy. And even behind the scenes, if you follow and pay attention, I'm not going to criticize anybody, but all the stuff that we would hear under the Wilpon era of even things like, I hate to say it, but like just Google it, whether it was sexual harassment or different issues, even from the behind the scenes in the offices and stuff there. Like Steve Cohen came in and they did, they brought in new people. Like there's a new head of communications from the Mets. I've spoken to her. She came from like working and running comms at like MasterCard. She's super professional. Like they just brought in professional people to do things there in a way that all this stuff should be better. We shouldn't have the weird leaks where something bizarre happened and I don't know, the assistant GM is like fighting with like like we shouldn't have weird stuff going on. Nobody should be, I don't know, the weird other LOL Met stuff that we always heard about. I think this is a very, it's got this wonderful balance of professionalism, but not the corporate Yankee feel. It's professional, but still it's OMG, and it's have fun and sing your song and express yourself. And Jesse Winker, you're welcome. Come with your facial hair and lie on the field with your shoes off and be weird, and you're welcome to be here with the Mets. Like that balance just feels wonderful.
It's funny because, again, you took the words right out of my mouth where, you were saying it's so much more professional. It's so much more buttoned up. It avoids leaks, but it's not corporate. And I think that has been the ultimate sort of downfall of the Yankees. And I'm not writing the eulogy on the Yankees. I think they're still good. They have Aaron Judge. They're still going to be a great team. They still spend a ton of money. They still have the brand. Like this, the Yankees are still going to be very good. I just don't know if the Yankees, as the people who grew up the way I grew up in the 90s, born in 1986, living through the nightmare that was a Yankees dynasty if you weren't a Yankees fan, I think those Yankees may be gone forever. I don't know if they're ever getting back to that. George is not coming back. Hal is not George. They are just run differently, and I'm not sure that they are ever going to get to, under this ownership and this leadership, this kind of this allure that they had before. And look, a lot of people in the comments are saying this, that Joe K, this signing is also a statement that there's a new boss in town, alluding to, the name that George Steinbrenner had forever. And then says this quite point blankly, says the Yankees also need to learn that the allure of pinstripes is not a thing anymore. And Lori, look, I think it'll be a thing for some people. I think you're still going to get the player that maybe, grows up in this area or has a mother or a father, whomever was a Yankees fan for whatever reason. You're always going to have that. But I think there's something about trying to sell players on this culture of winning when you haven't won since 2009, this legacy thing when a lot of these guys, you got players now whose grandparents were barely alive when, you roll out the Joe DiMaggios of old. It's like, I don't know if that means anything to a player in 2025.
I'm going to disagree.
Okay.
I'm going to say, I hear you. And I do think Mets fans should be enjoying this. And you made the point. Yankees still competitive. Big picture, I would say, in baseball, the Dodgers are now the evil empire. So it's not the Yankees. I think that's true. The Dodgers are now the evil empire. They're the team everybody's gunning for, shooting for, whatever. That's that. But in terms of the allure of the pinstripes and the Yankees, to me, the interesting, if I were a Yankee fan or talking to my Yankee fans on the radio, who are feeling down right now, and maybe they'll think this is a bizarre comparison because the Yankees have had so much success, 27 titles or whatever, is I look at the New York Knicks. And for a long time, we said this generation of players, Madison Square Garden and the Mecca, it doesn't matter. and free agents weren't coming. Nobody wanted to play there, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. And the Knicks were downtrodden, and they were downtrodden because they were a joke, because they were embarrassing on the court and off the court, and because they lost for the better part of 20 years. So the Knicks brand had taken such a hit, and it felt like it didn't matter. That's what people would argue to this generation of players. Well, you know what? Lo and behold, when you bring in the right person in Leon Rose, and you establish actually a winning culture and bring in the right players, and they haven't even won a title, but there is now a tradition of winning. And you know what? It turns out to this generation of players, Madison Square Garden still matters. It still is the Mecca. You hear that language from players. Opposing players want to come in and have their best game. They talk about Knicks fans. So I think before I write off that to this generation of players, Yankee Stadium and the allure of the pinstripes doesn't matter, I'm not willing to go there. But I also don't think I have to cheapen that to say it might be a nuance, but to say that the Mets have arrived in a way where, yes, to that point, I do think Steve Cohen is the boss in town. Like, between Steve Cohen and Hal Steinbrenner, who's the alpha? Like, it's not even, I mean, is it even a question? Like,
I mean, it shouldn't be.
Steve, and you know what? If Hal's being honest, he's like, yeah, it is. That dude's got $21 billion. I don't. He's the richest owner in baseball. I'm not. Like, Steve Cohen is the boss. Like, that's true. So Met fans, like, embrace that, love it. It's true. And what the Mets will build will be different. And the allure of, and what's fun is, let the allure of the pinstripes still be a thing. Let them go out, the Yankees, I think, and now use some of this money. Go get yourself a top outfielder. Go get yourself, Yankee fans, go get yourself a top first baseman. And build around Aaron Judge, because they have a ticking time clock there. The Mets just signed their new superstar. He's 26 years old. Aaron Judge is 32. So they're in, like, urgency must win now. And the Mets, the way I looked at it with Steve Cohen and all this, like, of course the Mets, you want to win a World Series next year. You want to win the World Series the year after, whatever. But there's this, like, wonderful window now with Lindor and Soto that you look at and kind of go, and if David Stearns can work his magic and build a pitching factory, the same pitching factory that gave us Corbin Burns and all these incredible, and Josh Hader and all the pitchers that came out of Milwaukee, like, if he can build a pitching factory that goes with then that acquisition of position player talent, wow. I have a question for you that somebody asked me last night. Let's pivot to this. Somebody asked me, how many titles, how many World Series does Juan Soto have to win in the next 15 years for this contract to be successful with the Mets versus, let's say, if he had signed with the Yankees, how many World Series does it take for it to be successful?
That's a good question. I don't want to say this because I think part of what I say might be misconstrued as this, like, loser's mentality. I don't mean it in this regard.
Yep.
I think he needs to win one in 15 years. Because, and look, I would like to get to the point where the Mets are consistent winners, like you said before. I would like to get to the point where the Mets have a 30-something year run of never having a losing season the way the Yankees have. I would like to get to a point where the expectations are for the Mets, dare I say, to win a World Series every year. That would be terrific. That does not happen overnight. This is step one of that. Right now, as you and I sit here on Monday, December 9th, the Mets haven't won a World Series in almost 40 years. It's 38. It's as old as I am, 38 years old. You got to win the first one before you can ever win another one. If he wins one, he has already solidified himself here. And I think that part of it, people want to talk about legacy. People want to talk about, what you can do as a member of the Yankees. I do think because of the history, and I think this is where, you're probably right on some of the things with regard to what the pinstripes mean. It's another World Series that the Yankees won with another group of stars. Would Juan Soto be one of the leaders? Yes, but would a lot of people defer to Aaron Judge? Probably, fairly, unfairly. I don't know. This has the opportunity to be Juan Soto's team. Now, I love Francisco Lindor. Francisco Lindor is great. He was the first guy that came here and put his stamp on the Steve Cohen Mets. And I know he was traded for, but he had to double down and stay here. So this is not, I think Lindor is great. And because Lindor is a shortstop, probably a better all-around player than Juan Soto, although no one's going to mistake them, with regards to their offensive output.
Yeah.
But to your point about this window, the Mets had a window that looked like maybe it was closing before it ever got fully opened, because you look at Lindor, and no, he's not old, but he is now over 30. You look at Nimmo, he's over 30. You look at some of the people that they have on this team. Senga is kind of a win now move. Diaz is a win now move. What Steve Cohen and David Stearns did was they took a wrecking ball to the window by signing Juan Soto. They ripped down the side of their house to build an addition on it, because now not only do the Mets have an opportunity to win in 2025, but they have an opportunity to win and be good for the next decade of Juan Soto's career, where you can easily transition from, this window of good Mets baseball into the next that's maybe led by Juan Soto, and who knows, maybe it's Mark Vientos, maybe it's Francisco Alvarez, maybe it's somebody we don't even know who's not even on the team yet, whatever.
Christian Scott, Brandon Sproat, it's all that group of Mets. I agree with you. Juan Soto's generation, he at 26, he's closer in age to Vientos. So he's part of actually, that kind of next generation in some ways. And yet he's so advanced and was such a prodigy as a hitter at 19 years old. But I agree with you that the window and the bridge and the generations, all of that blurred into what we hope will be prolonged excellence. But I think, look, Tom Seaver won one World Series with the Mets and has a statue out front.
Yep.
If Juan Soto wins a World Series with the Mets and continues on this trajectory as a hitter to putting up all-time great numbers that have him in the, top 20 of all hitters of all time in baseball, or something like that, top 25 hitters of all time in baseball before he's done, I think there's a statue out front. So that's the difference in terms of the Yankees. To your point, win one World Series, it would be, Soto was part of winning a World Series for the Aaron Judge era of Yankee baseball.
Yep.
That's kind of how that felt. And what's nice with Lindor and the personality there, I think, is that Lindor is, Lindor, I was saying this last night on the show and talking to some of my producers. It's not like Batman and Robin. Lindor's nobody's Robin, but it is sort of like superstar 1A, 1B. And Lindor is really comfortable. And Aaron Judge is such a humble, incredible person on, off the field, all of that. He is so not an ego first guy, but even physically, you just stand in his shadow. And he's already, he's a multiple MVP. Look at this past season. As great as Soto played, Soto had an MVP season, but couldn't beat out his own teammate for the MVP. He's one of the top three hitters. He's one of the top three hitters in all of baseball. But on the Mets, if they ever do that fakakta ridiculous golden at bat, thing that they're talking about on the Yankees, unless it's the playoffs, in the playoffs, you would pick, in the postseason, you would pick Soto over Judge. But if it's a Tuesday in July, Aaron Judge is the golden at bat with the Mets. Juan Soto's the golden at bat. It's like, come here, build it, win one title, and you are a made man with this franchise. Look at what Mets fans do to Keith Hernandez and the 1986 Mets and how they feel about them. Win one title and you're celebrated forever with Mets fans.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm going to jump into the comments here, just a couple miscellaneous ones that I've been ignoring, but I think are important. And then, Laura, do you have time for one more question before we get out of here? Okay, so Keith Blacknick, the media goon, says, nice jersey, Sap. He gave this Mercury Mets jersey to me at the QBC, so I figured I would wear it in celebration. And then he followed it up by saying, thanks to everyone who came to the QBC this weekend. A lot of viewers and listeners, I'm sure, were there. Lori and I were there talking a little bit about it. And yes, it's a great event. You should mark it on your calendar every year. Stevie Mack says, OMJ, oh my Juan, I think is a very appropriate comment right there. Going along with what you said earlier, kind of the entire point so far, Carson says Cohen, Stearns, Mendoza, Lindor, and Soto, 5 pillars of the franchise are now fulfilled. The next decade is set. We have Hector, Blunt Thoughts, saying, hi, Lori, this is Hector. You may not remember, but I just wanted to say it was great chatting with you on Saturday at the Queens Baseball Convention. You were a lot more confident than I was with regards to the Mets and Juan Soto. Corey says, you speak the truth, Lori. I remember riding the train to school in the 80s with as many, if not more, people wearing Mets gear than those wearing Yankees gear. And Mr. Nobody says, while it is charming, the truth is the old Yankees had the best players because they had the most money. And I think there's something fair to be said there where they had an advantage financially for a lot of their existence. Once free agency became a thing, there was nobody else. But like you said, that it's kind of shifted now. The Dodgers are the evil empire, and there's not just one team with all the money. We always used to joke, in the 90s and 2000s, oh, Kansas City, they're just a farm team for the Yankees. The Oakland A's, they're just a farm team for the Yankees. And that might be true in some regards, that they still act like farm teams for other teams. But other teams are doing what the Yankees, and basically only the Yankees, did for a couple decades. This last comment I'm going to bring up will segue into our final question, and this comes from Charlie, great listener, great viewer, says, Lori's right, and it also signals that the Mets are a destination team for future free agents, and I hope at least one current one. Can you hear me, Pete? So, Lori, now that Juan Soto is here, again, unofficially, physical, all that nonsense, announcement, all that stuff. Now that Juan Soto is a member of the Mets, that is the biggest item off of the shopping list, but the Mets still have a lot of work to do. So what are your thoughts on the Mets being a destination, not only in 2024, but moving forward? And just any thoughts on if Pete is the right next guy?
So I will guarantee that the Mets will bring in a good corner infield bat. And whether that's by free agency or trade, whether that's to play first or third, the Mets, I will guarantee you that Brett Beatty will not be in the Mets opening day lineup unless there were a bunch of injuries in March.
I don't mean to interrupt, but everybody puts out, like, on Twitter, big signing happens, and then like MLB.com and all projected Mets lineup. And I had to laugh because they had Brett Beatty like playing third, batting ninth. And I know you can only do it with who's on the team.
I
but
know.
Like, no.
I know. I saw the same thing. And I was like, please stop. No offense to him. I actually think that he'll probably be traded, and the Mets should probably sell on that and get back, something, a good arm, whatever you get for him or whatever. And I like Beatty. I think he can actually be successful someplace in his career. But the Mets will get a corner bat. And whether that's going to be now, I think I would say better than 50% chance it's Pete Alonso. I think this owner does understand that the fan base likes Pete, and that not everybody can play in New York. I also think Pete, what's weird about Pete is you look at the body type and you think, well, guys who look like that, how are they going to age or whatever? He has been so incredibly durable and healthy. So I think that, it depends on how many years he's going to want. And I think now that the Yankees and other teams didn't get Juan Soto, Pete's going to be in demand. So we have to see what happens with that. So I think we have to see. But whether it's Pete Alonso, Christian Walker for first base, or whether it's a trade for his first baseman, or they have the other option of getting somebody for third and moving Vientos over, whatever it is that they do, the Mets will 100% guaranteed have a corner infielder that will be added to this team, that will be a very good bat. And my guess would be better slightly better than 50% chance that is actually Pete Alonso. Pete wants it. The Mets want it. As long as Boris doesn't get too piggish about the number of years and make the dollars absurd, I think it'll get done, and it's more likely Pete, yes, as that. And then what I would say is, you and I talked about this, but the pitchers I have my eye on for the Mets are guys like Nate Eovaldi or Walker Buehler, the guys where I think we've seen from David Stearns, he does not like to go 7+ years for a starting pitcher who is 30 years or over. It just is something that goes against what he believes and the injury histories and the up and down nature. So I think we're more likely, I think there will be at least one more starting pitcher added, but whether that's by trade or free agency, but it's going to be, I think, somebody that they don't have to sign for 7+ years.
I agree with everything that you just said across the board, from the damn near guarantee that they will get a corner infielder of significance, whatever significance means to people. That can be a little subjective, but they are going to get somebody so that, again, not disparaging, but I don't love Brett Beatty as much as you do, but to make sure that a guy like him is not on the opening day roster, barring something crazy unforeseen. There will be an established major leaguer added to this team, either at third or at first. I do think that it's a little better than 50% chance that it is Alonso. Yes, you and I did talk about it with regards to the starting pitching. I also think you just get better return on investment, better bang for buck, going in longer term deals on offensive players rather than starting pitchers, especially once those pitchers start to hit 30 years old. So I'm not surprised to see them not being on Snell or Burns or Fried or any of those guys. The last thing I want to ask you is just specifically about Pete. Mets fan Lori Rubinson, do you want it to be Pete? Because this is a good comment that I'll kind of use as the segue for the question. We talked a lot about legacy. And Brad says the Mets have 2 potential Hall of Famers, Lindor and now Soto, maybe 3 if Pete can rejoin the team and retire as a Met. You know, if he hits that 500 home run threshold, which he's on pace to do. I know he's not the player that Soto is. He's not the player that Lindor is. He needs to just be Pete and just hit home runs and knock in runs. But so I think the legacy stuff matters. I think Pete has always meant more to the Mets than he does to another team. So you, as Lori Rubinson, the fan, do you want it to be Pete that is the next major addition?
First, I'll say I would be really surprised if Pete Alonso ends up in the Hall of Fame, even if he hits 500 home runs.
Okay.
Because I think as voters to the Hall of Fame age of a certain generation and value things, home runs are valuable and people value home runs. But I think Pete is perceived as a one-dimensional player with power. And over the last few years, we've seen some of the other, batting average, on base percentage, some of all those things go down. Yeah. And so Pete is now, I do think that the pressure of the contract and this being a contract year weighed on him. I think Pete is not I think Pete is more of a 40 home run guy annually, 40 plus home run guy annually for the next few years, and not a 30 plus home run guy. So I do believe the power is real. And when the pressure is not feeling that same way on him and he can just say F it and be himself, you're looking at a guy I think is going to hit you, 45 home runs, pretty consistently. So that's the plus side. And I still think this lineup needs that additional formidable bat in it, whether it's Pete or somebody else. You need that protection in the middle of the lineup and that formidable bat, so people aren't just wanting to pitch around Lindor and Soto. And Vientos, we hope, will fulfill the promise and do what he did again and not have a sophomore slump and all that. But you need that one more big bat. And so a Pete would be really important. And I would be happy if the Mets re-signed Pete. I can't help myself that I've got a little David Stearns in me, where I tend to also look at these things. There's the emotional side of things, and then there is the analytics sort of practical side of things. And I look at Pete and think he's worked really hard on his defense to turn himself into a okay, probably slightly below average first baseman, not because he's kind of gotten pretty good at scooping up balls and receiving, but that arm will go AWOL.
Yeah, he's good. He's good around the bag. His footwork is good. His digging the balls out is good, but yeah, he does leave a lot to be desired in other parts.
His range is below average, and based on his body type and who he is, I don't see that really improving. And the arm is actually strong and can be good. But could I see, God forbid, but can I see Pete pulling a Lucas Duda in a big moment in a World Series and the throw going AWOL? Like, I can see it, you know. So that's the thing defensively on Pete. And then base running. Pete will always be a below average base runner. So you're looking at somebody who doesn't hit for average, the average went down. Maybe that can go back up, but we've seen the average go down. We've seen the defense is always going to be below average. It's okay. It's passable, but, and the base running will always be below average. So you're really paying for the power and the personality, and that's okay to pay for that. And for somebody who's, now, you're not paying for someone in their 20s. So with all of that, I guess it's a way of saying I want Pete Alonso back as a fan. I like Pete Alonso. I enjoy rooting for him. I think he's a really good guy. I think he's good as part of the clubhouse and the dynamic of this team. I would love to see him stay and shatter every Met all-time home run record. I don't think he's going into Cooperstown. I could be wrong. I just think based on everything I just said, that's not a Hall of Fame player. It just isn't.
Yeah, that's fair. I use the comment from Brad not to hammer home the Hall of Fame point, but just to, talk about the legacy potential. Very last question. There's no upper limit on a guy like Soto. We talked about that at the QBC. You spend whatever money, if you have the money, spend it, get the player. Alonso's different. I love Alonso. I want him back. There is an upper limit. I'm not going to ask you to predict contracts. The numbers are so weird, and who knows, opt-outs, opt-ins, options, whatever. What would be if you were David Stearns, what would be your upper limit in terms of years for Pete Alonso that you would say, okay, AAV is one thing. The owner has it. The owner can spend it. The owner has opened up this window with Soto, but you also have to realize that, Soto can't play right field forever, and Soto might have to move to first base at some point. So what I think the thing with Alonso is going to come down to one thing alone, and that is years on the deal. So if you were going to give him a contract, what would be your upper limit on years?
By the way, 100% agree with you. I think with David Stern, with Steve Cohen's money, a few more $1 million in a particular year on the average annual value to me is less important than the number of years. And to me, I'd be looking at a 5-year deal. That's what I would want from Pete. I'd want a 5-year deal. Now, does that mean emotionally at the 11th hour, if it comes down to it, is it possible that they throw in a 6th year to get this thing done? Maybe, but that's also where David Stearns has to look at Steve Cohen and say, if we get to year 6 and this guy is a shadow of his former self and we need the DH spot, he's a strikeout machine and he's just not viable anymore. Are we going to be able to basically cut bait nicely?
Right.
Will we be able to do that? That we'll be throwing him an extra year as a lifetime achievement award to say thank you for your service. Or if you're okay with that, hey, Steve Cohen, then maybe we go 6. But for me, I'd want a 5-year deal with Pete Alonso, and I'd rather pay a little bit more on average annual value than go longer. I'm sure that Boris and company, they're going to be looking for like 7. They're going to want 7 or 8 years. That's what they're going to want, 7 or 8 years.
Would you go over $25 million a year for him if you could get him on a 5-year deal? Because I think 25 is a good number for Pete, but like, would you make him a $30 million a year player if it meant you could give him 5 years instead of 6?
Yeah, I would. And I
agree.
think that where the market is right now, I think that things just went haywire with also the Soto deal is obviously it's one of one. It's very different, but even look at what we're seeing from the pitching market. I mean, my goodness, if Frankie Montas is worth $17 million a year, what's Pete Alonso worth? I don't know. It's like, so yeah, I think that I was hoping Pete for 25 million a year, and I was looking at, you look at Freddie Freeman's contract, and you look at Paul Goldschmidt, and you look at all these other contracts, and you say to yourself, well, what's Pete worth? Like, I don't think he's worth that much more. Well, that's all well and good, but I think, yeah, it probably is going to be, if the Mets want him, I think that I think it's going to minimally take 5 at 30 to 150 to get him. And it may be that, do they have to go to, that 6th year or something like that if you really want him? And that's what Mets fans should be asking themselves, unfortunately.
All right. I love it. Lori, thank you so much for joining us, for joining me, I should say, Until Mets Do Us Part, here on this very special episode, a Monday night version, talking mostly about Juan Soto coming to our New York Mets, but there at the end, Pete Alonso and some other things moving forward. You can catch Lori Rubinson on WFAN every Sunday night. Right now, the time still fluctuates, right, based on Sunday Night Football, but once the football season's over, you'll be back at your regular starting time.
Yeah, regular show usually is 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern time here in New York City. That's my regular show most of the year. During Sunday night football season, I'm on after Sunday Night Football, usually midnight to 2 a.m. You can also follow me on X, on Twitter, at L Rubinson, and happy to interact with people there as well.
One of the best at it. And just because I believe in giving people their flowers, Matt Ibanez says, thank you, Lori, for filling in for him. But also Charlie said, thanks, Lori. And Armand, another couple great listeners to the show, watchers of the show, say thank you, Lori. And I extend that again. Thank you so much for being here. I'm John Sapanaro. This is Till Mets Do Us Part, live on YouTube, live on Twitter, all courtesy of the Brella Sports Network. And we will see you tomorrow when we come back, me and Matt Ibanez talking about Juan Soto and what's going on at the winter meetings. We'll see you then.